Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into a mystery that's as chilling as it is perplexing?
I'm ready.
We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident,
Ah, yeah,
one of the most talked about unsolved mysteries of the 20th century.
absolutely.
9 experienced hikers vanish in the remote Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia and the circumstances surrounding their deaths.
Bizarre, to say the
To
least.
say the least. You guys sent us some articles and research about this, and we are going to unpack it all. Not just what we know, but also why this case continues to fascinate people even decades later.
It's a story that just grabs you, doesn't it?
It does.
This case has it all. You've got this harsh, unforgiving landscape,
Yeah.
a group of adventurous hikers,
Yeah.
and then a discovery so strange, it almost feels like it's straight out of a horror movie.
Yeah. And it's not just that they died.
Right.
It's those little details that make it so creepy.
Yeah. Like what?
Like a tent sliced open from the inside.
Oh, yeah.
Belongings scattered everywhere. Footprints leading into the freezing darkness.
It's like something terrified them.
Yes.
Sent them running for their lives.
Yes, it's like a primal fear, right?
Absolutely. It's that sense of inexplicable panic. Like something just snapped, a complete break from any kind of rational behavior.
Yeah.
That's the part that really gets under your skin, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you're peeking into a moment of sheer terror, frozen in time.
Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit.
All right.
February 1959. Picture the Ural Mountains in the dead of winter.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not just talking about cold. We are talking brutal conditions.
Mm.
Vast, snow-covered peaks, howling winds, temperatures that would make your breath freeze in your lungs.
You got it.
Really?
That's where the story unfolds.
Yes. And into this unforgiving environment, a group of 9 experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, set off on what should have been, at least on paper, a challenging but ultimately routine expedition.
Yeah, these weren't just some, weekend warriors. These
Yeah.
were seasoned hikers, people that knew the mountains,
Right.
familiar with the challenges. And early on, it seems like their journey is going just as planned. They were keeping these really detailed diaries, documenting their adventure with photos, capturing, the beauty, the breathtaking beauty, but also that unforgiving nature of the Ural Mountains.
And then silence.
Yeah.
Weeks go by with no word. And a chilling dread starts to settle in among the friends and families of those hikers waiting back home.
Right, exactly.
Search parties are finally sent out.
Yeah.
And what they find, it's not just a tragedy. It's a scene that just defies easy explanation.
So imagine this, right? You've finally reached their campsite.
Yeah.
The tent is perched precariously on this slope. It's ripped open from the inside.
What?
Yeah, as if someone was desperately clawing their way out.
Wow.
And inside the tent, belongings are strewn everywhere.
Right.
Warm clothes, food, supplies, essentials that you just wouldn't leave behind unless something was seriously wrong.
Yeah, you don't leave your stuff unless you are getting out of there,
Right.
unless it's an emergency.
Exactly.
So it's like they abandon the shelter in a blind panic.
Yeah, and then there are the footprints.
Oh, the footprints leading away from the tent.
Bleeding down the mountain into the deep snow. And some are barefoot,
Right.
some are just in socks.
Oh, that is creepy.
Following those tracks, you can almost feel that desperation, the chilling reality of their flight from something.
Yeah.
So the bodies themselves were found scattered. Some were closer to what seemed to be a makeshift campfire.
Oh, so they were trying to get warm.
Yeah, it seemed that way. Others were found further down the mountain in a ravine. This wasn't a neat contained scene.
Right.
This was a chaotic tableau of death spread across this frozen landscape.
Okay.
And so 2 of the hikers were found close to the embers of that fire. They had charred hands.
Oh, wow.
You can almost picture them,
Huddled around.
huddled there, desperately trying to stay warm. But why were they so poorly dressed for those conditions?
Right. Why would they be out there like that?
That question just hangs over the entire incident.
Okay, so 2 by the fire.
Right.
You said some further down in a ravine. What about in between?
Oh, yeah. So there were 3 hikers that were found between the fire and the tent, as if they were trying to make their way back to shelter.
But why leave in the first place?
Right. What could have been so terrifying that it drove them out into that frozen night?
Right.
And then there are the 4 hikers. The 4 hikers that were found in the ravine buried under the snow, they had injuries. And these injuries were particularly disturbing.
Oh, no.
We're not talking about just exposure here. These were severe traumas, fractured skulls, ribs broken with a force that was likened to a car crash. One hiker was even missing her tongue and eyes.
Oh, my gosh. That's horrible.
And those injuries, particularly that internal trauma, are really where the case takes a turn from what could have been a tragic accident
Right.
into something far more unsettling.
Okay.
These injuries just weren't consistent with a simple fall
Yeah.
or a stumble. Adding to the puzzle, there were no signs of an avalanche.
So nothing from the mountain itself.
Nothing. No rockfall. Nothing on the landscape itself that really explains the violence that was inflicted on their bodies.
Okay, so the official cause of death for most of the hikers was hypothermia.
Right.
But what drove them to abandon their shelters so inadequately dressed and flee into that freezing wilderness?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yes.
That's the question that's haunted investigators and armchair detectives for decades.
Yeah, I've been reading about all these different theories, and there are a lot of them,
Oh, yeah, we've got a lot to unpack.
a lot to unpack. And they range from avalanches
Uh-huh.
to Soviet military tests,
Right.
paranormal encounters,
Yeah.
even a Yeti attack.
You name it. It's out there.
I know, I love it.
Each one of these theories attempts to explain the inexplicable.
Yeah.
It's trying to piece together a narrative from these really chilling fragments of evidence.
And believe me, listener, some of these theories are going to take us down some pretty wild paths.
Buckle up.
Yeah. Get ready to explore the whole spectrum of possibilities here.
I'm excited.
From the scientifically plausible
Yeah.
to the downright strange.
Love it.
Okay, but before we jump into all of that,
Okay.
let's take a closer look at those injuries.
Okay.
Because the type and severity of those traumas
Right.
might give us some clues about what kind of forces were at play that night.
Okay.
For example, those broken ribs.
Yeah.
Could they tell us anything about, if there was an attack,
Yeah.
the direction?
Yeah, or the size and weight of an assailant.
Right. Like, are we talking about a person or something else?
Or something else.
And that missing tongue
Oh, yeah.
and eyes. Oh, that's creepy.
I know.
It feels almost ritualistic, doesn't it?
It certainly does add another unsettling layer of symbolism to this whole case.
Yeah.
But we've got to be careful about jumping to conclusions. Even in the face of the seemingly bizarre, there could be a perfectly rational explanation.
Yeah. Okay.
Tragic, but rational.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these theories.
Yep.
Remember, we're not trying to solve the case here.
Right.
We're just examining the possibilities.
Okay.
What makes sense, what doesn't, and what raises even more questions.
Okay. And there are a lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
So let's start with maybe the explanation that seems the most obvious, at least at first.
Okay.
What about an avalanche? I mean, we're talking about mountains. It's winter,
It seems almost expected, right?
right?
An avalanche definitely seems like a natural starting point.
Yeah.
But if we dig a little deeper,
Okay.
a few inconsistencies start to emerge.
Like what?
Well, the investigators at the time, they didn't find any evidence of an avalanche.
Really?
No debris field, no signs of the kind of massive snow movement that you would expect to see.
To cause those kinds of injuries?
Exactly.
Okay. But wouldn't an avalanche explain why they ran from the tent? In a panic. I mean, that's a terrifying experience.
It is. It's true that initial panic, that makes sense. But think about those severe internal injuries.
Yeah, the broken
Mhm.
ribs, fractured skulls.
Right. And those are really typical avalanche injuries.
Okay.
Usually you'd see more crushing injuries.
Oh.
Asphyxiation.
Right. Okay.
Not these like localized, almost focused traumas.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So an avalanche may be less likely.
Yep.
But how about something a little more, I don't know, cloak and dagger?
Okay, I like where you're going.
Soviet military tests?
Ooh.
The Ural Mountains during the Cold War?
Yeah.
I feel like that's got to be a recipe for some top secret activity.
It certainly sets the stage for intrigue, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, this was a time of really high tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Both sides are testing all sorts of experimental technologies.
So could they have stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see?
Yeah.
Like a missile test gone wrong?
It's possible.
Or exposure to some kind of experimental chemical weapon?
It's possible. And you mentioned those traces of radiation found on some of the hikers' clothing.
Yes. What was that all about?
That definitely adds another layer here.
So what kind of radiation are we talking about? Was this a nuclear thing or was it something else? Because I feel like that changes the whole picture.
That's the crucial question. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the information that's available about the type and level of radiation is pretty limited. It's somewhat contradictory.
Okay.
Some reports suggest it was beta radiation,
Okay.
which could point to a relatively localized source, perhaps something that the hikers came into contact with rather than, fallout from a large-scale event.
Okay, so maybe not Chernobyl-level radiation.
Right.
But still, it makes you wonder what they might have encountered.
It does.
And wouldn't the Soviet authorities have had to cover something like that up?
You would think so, right?
Wouldn't there be more evidence?
You would think. And that's kind of the challenge with this theory. It relies on a lot of speculation. It assumes this level of secrecy that may or may not have even been in place. And despite, decades of investigation, no concrete evidence has ever been found linking the Dyatlov Pass incident to any specific military activity.
Okay, so we've got an avalanche that doesn't quite fit.
Right.
We've got military secrets shrouded in Cold War mystery. What about something a little more out there?
Okay, I like it. Let's go there.
Those strange orange lights people reported seeing in the sky. Could we be talking about a UFO encounter?
Now we're venturing into the realm of the truly unexplained. And while I'm generally a believer in seeking rational explanations, I have to admit the UFO theory, it has a certain appeal.
It does. It just fits, doesn't it?
It kind of does, yeah.
With the overall strangeness.
Yeah, it just adds to it.
You've got those lights. You've got the hikers' seemingly irrational behavior, fleeing their tent in a panic.
Right.
It's like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right. And those bizarre injuries, right? Especially the missing tongue and eyes.
Yes.
It fuels the imagination.
It really does.
It evokes images of something not quite human, something operating beyond our understanding.
Okay, so let's indulge our inner X-Files fan for just a minute here.
Okay.
Let's say, hypothetically, it was a UFO encounter.
Right.
What kind of scenario could explain those injuries? Were they beamed up and experimented on? Was it some kind of defensive weapon that caused those traumas? I mean, what are we thinking here?
Well, now we're really getting into speculation. But if we were to entertain this UFO theory, one possibility is that the hikers stumbled upon, a landing or some kind of activity that just frightened them.
Okay.
Perhaps they got too close. And whatever technology was being used inadvertently caused those injuries.
And you mentioned that beta radiation earlier.
Right.
Some people theorize that certain types of advanced propulsion systems could leave behind traces of radiation.
Right.
Maybe that's the link.
That's an interesting thought. And it's a good example of how different pieces of evidence can be woven together to create a narrative.
Right.
Even if that narrative is highly, highly speculative.
Right.
But we have to remember that this UFO theory, like many of the others, suffers from a lack of any concrete evidence.
Okay, so maybe not aliens, but what about something else lurking out there in the wilderness? Something a little more earthly, but still pretty terrifying. Some people think a Yeti or some kind of unknown predator could be the culprit.
The Yeti, oh no, that's a theory that really captures the imagination.
I know.
It plays into our deep-seated fear of the unknown. This idea of something powerful, something hidden, lurking just beyond our sight.
And I know it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But think about it. We've got this remote mountainous region, unexplained deaths, some pretty brutal injuries, including that missing tongue. Could a large predator have been involved?
Well, if we're going to be scientific about it, the lack of any animal tracks around the campsite, that's a pretty big hurdle for this theory.
Okay.
Plus, most animal attacks just wouldn't result in the specific pattern of injuries that we see in the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Okay.
Especially that internal trauma.
Yep.
Animals tend to go for exposed areas. They don't typically inflict, these focused blows to the chest.
So maybe it wasn't a typical animal.
Yep.
Maybe it was something bigger, stronger, something we haven't even discovered yet, something with the power to cause those kinds of injuries. And maybe, just maybe, took that tongue as a trophy.
Now you're tapping into that primal fear again. And it's what makes this case so captivating. It forces us to confront the limits of our own knowledge, the possibility that there are things out there that we haven't even begun to understand.
All right, okay. Let's shift gears for a second and consider a much darker possibility.
All right.
Could the hikers have turned on each other? I mean, we know that isolation and extreme conditions can do strange things to the mind. Maybe the pressure of the expedition, the harsh environment, pushed one or more of them to the breaking point.
It's a chilling thought, and it is one that investigators have considered.
Yeah.
But we have to be really careful not to project our own anxieties onto the past.
Right.
There's no evidence of any pre-existing conflict within the group.
Okay.
No signs of a struggle at the campsite, and nothing in their diaries or photos that suggests that there was, tension brewing.
But what about those injuries?
Right.
Some people point to them as evidence of a violent confrontation. Could those broken ribs have been caused by blunt force trauma from another person?
It's possible, but again, we're dealing with limited information.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact nature of all the injuries, and some could have easily been caused by falls or impacts during their panicked flight from the tent.
All right, so internal conflict is on the table, but the evidence is thin. What about another theory? One that's maybe a little less sensational, but still incredibly intriguing.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's called the infrasound hypothesis.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Tell me more.
Infrasound is a fascinating phenomenon. It's sound waves with frequencies below the range of human hearing.
Okay, so we can't even hear them.
Right.
Okay.
They're often produced by natural phenomena like wind or ocean waves, even earthquakes.
So how could something that you can't even hear play a role in this mystery?
Well, research has shown that although we can't hear infrasound, our bodies can still sense it.
Okay.
And certain frequencies can have a really profound psychological and physiological impact.
Really?
They can induce feelings of anxiety, dread, even hallucinations.
Wait, are you saying that these invisible sound waves could have made the hikers go crazy? They literally lose their minds.
It might sound far-fetched, but there is some evidence to support it. The topography of the Dyatlov Pass region, with its steep valleys and its wind patterns, could have created these conditions for infrasound to build up, potentially reaching levels that could affect the hikers.
Hold on. Are we saying that wind could have created a sound powerful enough to make them slash their way out of their tent and run barefoot into the snow?
It's a bold claim, but the infrasound theory does offer a potential explanation for some of the seemingly irrational behavior.
Okay.
Imagine being bombarded by this invisible force.
Yeah.
You're experiencing this sense of overwhelming dread, nausea, disorientation. You might not even be able to think clearly.
Wow.
Right. To
Yeah.
make rational decisions, you might just run driven by this primal urge to escape.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't explain those injuries, does it?
Right.
How does wind, even freaky inaudible wind, break bones and cause internal bleeding?
That's the challenge with the infrasound theory. While it might explain the panic and the flight, it doesn't fully account for the physical trauma.
Okay.
It's possible that some of the injuries were sustained during their flight, falls in the dark, collisions with trees or rocks, but those severe internal injuries, they remain a puzzle.
So we've got a lot of interesting theories, each with its own strengths, its own weaknesses. But it seems like none of them perfectly explain everything that happened that night. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing.
And that's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so frustrating, but also so fascinating. We're left with this void, right? This gap in our understanding that we just desperately want to fill.
So if we can't definitively point to a single cause, what about looking at this from a different angle? What about the psychological impact of the unknown? We know the human mind is incredibly powerful, and when faced with the inexplicable, it tends to fill in those blanks, sometimes in really terrifying ways.
That's a great point. I mean, we've been so focused on these external forces, but what about that internal landscape? What happens to the human psyche when it's confronted with the truly unknown, with something that just defies our understanding of the natural world?
You know, reading through these accounts, it's almost like the mystery itself has become a kind of monster,
Oh, wow.
feeding off our fear and fascination. Each generation seems to add its own layer of interpretation, like anxieties and beliefs just projected onto those frozen slopes.
It's like a psychological Rorschach test.
Oh yeah.
Right, with each person seeing something different in the ambiguity of the evidence.
Right.
And that brings us to a really interesting question. What does the enduring power of this mystery tell us about ourselves, about our need to understand the world, even when it seems determined to remain unknowable?
Yeah, it's like we're all drawn to that flicker of a campfire in the darkness, trying to make sense of the shadows dancing around us, you know?
Yeah, we crave those explanations, but maybe some stories are just meant to stay shrouded in mystery.
Maybe. But that doesn't stop us from trying, does it?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, it's been over 60 years since the Dyatlov Pass incident,
It has.
and it's still generating headlines and documentaries,
Oh, yeah.
even fictional retellings.
Absolutely.
It's like this case has just seeped into our collective consciousness, refusing to let go.
And it's fascinating how the theories themselves have evolved over time.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, early explanations, they focused on those natural causes,
Yeah.
potential human error, and then as the Cold War deepened, suspicion fell on secret military activities,
Right.
fueling all sorts of conspiracy theories.
Right, and today, with the internet and our fascination with the paranormal, we see even more outlandish ideas taking hold.
Oh, yeah.
UFOs,
Yetis.
Yetis, even interdimensional portals.
It's like the mystery itself has become this blank canvas for our anxieties,
Yeah.
our desires to believe in something beyond the ordinary.
It really is a reflection of our times, isn't it?
It is.
The Dyatlov Pass incident. It's a story that we keep telling. And retelling each generation, adding its own spin, its own fears and fascinations projected onto that snowy landscape.
That's it.
Okay, but let's bring it back to the hikers themselves for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about the theories,
Mm-hmm.
the evidence, the cultural impact. What about the human cost of this tragedy?
Right.
9 young lives cut short,
Yeah.
their dreams and aspirations just frozen in time.
It's important to remember that at the heart of this mystery are real people
Yes.
with families and loved ones who were left to grapple with the unanswered questions.
Of course.
The grief and just the lingering sense of not knowing.
Yeah, imagine being one of their parents,
No.
siblings, friends, and never truly understanding what happened to them.
It's just heartbreaking, and I think that's one of the reasons why this case resonates so deeply with so many people.
Yeah.
We can all relate to that feeling of loss, that yearning for closure, that primal fear of the unknown that just lurks at the edge of our awareness.
The Dyatlov Pass incident. It reminds us that despite our best efforts to control and understand the world, there are forces and events that remain beyond our grasp.
It's a humbling realization,
Yeah.
and maybe a necessary one.
So what do you think, listener? What truly happened on that frozen mountain? We've explored a range of possibilities, from the scientifically plausible to the downright bizarre, but ultimately the answer remains elusive.
Perhaps the Dyatlov Pass incident is a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, that there's beauty and wonder in the unknown.
Or maybe, just maybe, the truth is out there waiting to be discovered. Perhaps one day a new piece of evidence will emerge, a clue that will unlock the secrets of that fateful night. Until then, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass will continue to haunt us, beckoning us to explore the dark corners of our imagination and confront the enduring power of the unexplained. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive at Issachar.